Hey, all you Holly weirdos. Join us as we prepare another table setting for another spooky guest. We bring on James T. Bartlett, haunted writer of Gourmet Ghosts and true crime writer of the Alaskan Blonde. If it's anyone that knows about history, haunted bars, restaurants, and other notable places in Los Angeles, he's your dude. Originally from London, James T. Bartlett has been living in Los Angeles since 2004. In 2012, he published Gourmet Ghosts Los Angeles, an alternative guide to the history and ghost stories behind some of the city's oldest bars, restaurants, and hotels. While 2016's Gourmet Ghosts 2 focus on true crimes that took place at more of LA's notable locations and eateries. The books led to lectures, events, book club hostings, and appearances on radio podcasts and television shows, including Ghost Adventures and the UnXplained. The most recent book of James is The Alaskan Blonde, Sex, Secrets, and the Hollywood Story That Shocked America, a true crime book re-examining a scandalous 1953 murder that began in Alaska and ended in Hollywood. I mean, what crime doesn't? While his short story, Death Under the Stars, was included in the recent Sisters in Crime's Los Angeles anthology, Entertainment to Die For. As a travel and lifestyle journalist and historian, he has written for the Los Angeles Times, BBC, Los Angeles Magazine, ALTA California, High Life, Hemispheres, Westways, Atlas Obscura, and Crime Reads, and so much more. Let's just say that James T. Bartlett, it's like this Rolodex of knowledge when it comes to true crime hauntings and history in and around Los Angeles. You could literally dig through his brain and find so many places that you would never believe have ghosts and true crime connections. You want to stay tuned later in this episode because we touch on some places such as the Last Bookstore. We also talk about the Roosevelt Hotel. Does the Marilyn Monroe ghost still roam the halls of that hotel? Is her mirror still there? And we talk more about the Biltmore and the Barclay. It's going to be so delicious, so good. So grab your napkin, lay it on your lap, and grab some spooky hors d'oeuvres just in case you're a little hungry, because these gourmet ghosts are fresh and ready. Let's get Hollyweird with true crime and haunted writer James T. Bartlett. Hey friends, before we head into this episode, we wanted to make a few announcements. First and foremost, we wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you that showed up to the first annual Parapod Festival and participated in our panel with our friends Ellie Not So Confidential as we talked about the crimes and haunted times of the Barclay Hotel. Thank you so much for waking up early and joining us and participating in that panel. We got to meet quite a few of our listeners. We got to put names with faces. We got to meet our new listeners, and we were just so happy and so excited to see all of you and to participate in this amazing event. Tony Sweet did such an amazing job. We definitely want to thank Tony and the folks at Parapod Fest, our friends Ellie Not So Confidential and Patty Negri, and of course our new buddies Scarecast and Stephanie Strange. We made so many new connections, new friends, and that's what this whole festival was about. We got to learn so much about cryptids and witchcrafts. I mean, it's so crazy. And yes, the answer to your question is, will there be another one next year? Absolutely. We had great success this year, and we hope to participate with them again soon. Also, we wanted to make a huge announcement. Saturday, May 20th, mark your calendars, guys. You've been wanting this for such a long time. You've been asking us, when is Hollyweird Paranormal going to do a live event? I want to come and see it. And will it be held In a haunted location, absolutely. And Bryce will be bringing his Himalayan salt lamp for protection. So we want you guys to join us Saturday, May 20th with our friends Ellie Meekley and Ellie Not So Confidential for a live podcast event called Macabre Mansions and Haunted History. And you're not going to believe where it's set, where this event will be held. Get this, it's going to be held in a haunted location. The Heritage Square Museum. You've seen this on travel with Jack and Kelly Osborne as they investigated this place. You've heard about it in my personal ghost stories, in my personal paranormal accounts of this location. And you will learn more about it if you come to this event, because this is going to be an amazing night of true crime, spooks, history, and so much more. If you want to find out more information about it, please be following us, our friends Ellie Meekley, and of course, Ellie Not So Confidential. We'll be releasing more information on our social media sites. And of course, if you want to purchase tickets, you're like, no, take my money, then head on over to eventbrite.com/macabre mansions plus haunted history. You'll find the link right there. Tickets go for $30. And the time is from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. We'll be having some refreshments, some snacks, some haunts, some stories. You'll get to meet and greet with all of us, take pictures. We'll get to meet all of you listeners. It'll be a fantastic time. I'm assuming, I think we might have room for a tour of the mansions. So please follow us on our social medias. You can follow us at Hollyweird Paranormal on Facebook, Instagram, and of course on TikTok, and HWP Podcast on Twitter. We hope to see you guys there. This is such an amazing event. May 20th from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Heritage Square Museum. Tickets are being sold right now on eventbrite.com/macabre mansions plus haunted history. We've been selling quite a few tickets. We're so happy, and you definitely want to grab your space. It's going to be a great event. We are so excited, and we've been working really, really hard for this. If you are a fan of Hollyweird Paranormal, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, give us a rating and a review. It really does help us indie podcasters out. And if you have a ghost story to share, please forward them at hollyweirdparanormal@gmail.com. We are still collecting more ghost stories for an upcoming Listener's Tales episode. We are dying to do one, no pun intended. It's one of our favorite episodes to record. We have quite a few, but we need a few more in order to conduct this episode. So please send them your way. And if you want to support Hollyweird Paranormal, get this Hollyweird Paranormal train moving, then you can definitely help donate to the podcast by heading on over to www.patreon.com/hollyweirdparanormal.com. For as little as $1 or more per month, you can support the podcast, be inducted into our secret podcast society of Saturday Night Ghost Club. Yes, if you can't get enough of Hollyweird Paranormal and its ghost stories, trust me, we have some true ghost stories that we've collected from our friends and acquaintances, wrapped up in the spooky little box and dumped into the Saturday Night Ghost Club Society. Be inducted, do a binge, you won't regret it. And you'll also be gifted in stickers, coasters, magnets, and so much more. And for some of you who have already donated, please forward us your address so we can send you these goodies. All right, guys, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for this interview with James T. Bartlett. So grab your Himalayan salt lamp, make sure you have your selenite, and let's get Hollyweird with James. Hey guys, welcome to Hollyweird Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Merhab Chavez.
Hello, I'm Bryce Mitchell-Williams.
And we have a gourmet treat for you today.
Yes.
We have a writer of Gourmet Ghost 1 and 2 and Alaskan Blonde. We have the James Bartlett here with us today. We have a table prepared for him to sit down to give us all the delicacies of true crime and haunts in and around our lovely state of California, predominantly around Los Angeles. James, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Yes,
and
thank you so much.
Getting kind of Hollyweird with us. So tell us, like, how did you get into writing, and specifically writing about true crime and ghosts?
Oh, well, thanks for having me here. I think probably the first thing you'll be able to tell, and your listeners will be able to tell, is I'm not American. I'm from England originally, from North London, about 50 miles outside London. But I have been here in Los Angeles for about 15 years. Sorry, 20 years, in fact. And that's really how my writing for Gourmet Ghosts started. Because when I first moved here, like lots of people who moved to Los Angeles, I found the city a bit large, very spread out, very difficult to get to know, to get around.
100%.
And so what I started doing, which is what I think a lot of people do, is go to some bars and hotels, and especially during happy hour, to get to know a place and to get to explore a little bit. And I would sit at the bar and have a drink, and I would talk to the bartender, and I would ask them, if there are any good stories that they heard, good places, that they know to go. And what happened, of course, was that I started to get told a couple of ghost stories associated with some places, or some stories about celebrities, but then there were ghost stories. And then that sort of made my ears twitch up, because I've been a freelance journalist for over 20 years now. Like in the late 90s, I guess I started.
Oh, wow.
And that made my ears twitch up, and I would listen to the story, and then I would come home, and what I would do is I would look it up in the archives, the LA Times archives and the LA Examiner, the many newspapers that Los Angeles used to have, to see if there was any basis to this ghost story. Because, of course, you can't necessarily always prove a ghost story. But I thought, well, if anything did happen in that bar or in that hotel, and it kind of matches the story that I was told, then there's kind of the basis for an article, perhaps. Maybe one or two articles for the LA Weekly, as was back in the day. And it really just spiraled from there. And what I found out was that nearly every place I went to, nearly every place had a story, and 8 or 9 times out of 10, they related to something in the archives that had actually happened.
Yes.
And even when they didn't, I found other stuff in the archives that had happened in these places. And that really interested me, because as a new person in LA, I wanted a guide of places to go, but I wanted a guide of places to go where there'd be like a good ghost story or a good true crime story, and with a bit of history and architecture, rather than just a book that says, they say there's the ghost of a woman who's just here, who was murdered here. Yeah. Because otherwise you can write anything.
Right.
And I just thought I need to find out, any truth behind it. And that just got me into the world of archives, and I started collecting all these stories. And then eventually I put them into Gourmet Ghosts, which was the first book. I put some interviews in there because I interviewed staff members, and I basically just put them all together and put them out, thinking, the only person that's going to be interested in this, is my mother, and, perhaps my friends. And I was completely wrong. It was really, people really love stories. They really love history. They really love crime. They really love ghost stories. And there wasn't really a guide like this. So that was how the first one came about. And then the second one, which was Gourmet Ghosts 2 a few years later, that was almost entirely true crime. I just spent the whole time in the archives, because true crime had really exploded by that stage. And people weren't interested in the cocktails so much, but they wanted places that they could go, and they wanted to know the crimes that had happened there. And I found lots of places and lots of crazy crimes.
Yes, you did. And it's not the repetitive ones,
Right.
We bring this up, and I'm definitely going to bring up to the Barclay Hotel. People are too fixated on, of course, the sensationalized Cecil Hotel, but they overlook the Alexandria and sometimes the Biltmore, and definitely the Barclay is constantly overlooked. And when we researched it, I was like, oh my God.
Which I
Like,
think is sort of the brand of LA in general. I know when I first moved here, you just think like you have to live on Sunset, you have to live in like there's a very sort of Oscars era idea of LA when you're not living here. And I think that's true of the history of the city in general. Like there's the big ones that we've all heard about, of course, but this is like a living, breathing city with like stories being told constantly. It has very little to do with this sort of billboardization of our stories. So that's, I think, the thing I liked the most about the second book is that even us in this world, it was things that I had never heard of or experienced before reading this.
Yes, I think you're right. We very much get a certain image of Los Angeles and of Hollywood, especially. And we hear certainly about certain murders and certain crimes and certain stories a great deal. And that didn't interest me so much because I figured, history goes back beyond the 1960s or beyond 100 years. Goes
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and there are just as interesting crimes that happened, 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, crimes didn't get solved. 100 years ago, everybody had access to poison. 100 years ago, everybody had access to guns and they weren't licensed and they weren't looked after and they were very common. And crime and death and dying young was much more common than it is today. And that's what interested me more, was looking back into the history and finding this stuff out. And because I looked at other books, LA Guide books and other true crime, and I didn't find them in that. I didn't think I was going to find anything new about Charles Manson. But I did think to myself, I might be able to find a few things that happened at some landmarks or some very grand buildings or hotels that were very grand and famous in their day, but aren't necessarily famous anymore. And that's where the Cecil comes in and the Barclay Hotel comes in, the Alexandria comes in, a lot of these downtown places. Downtown was like the center of LA at the beginning. It was the hip and fashionable place to be, where the best hotels were and the best places to go. It changed. That changed. It's come back in the last 15, 20 years. Downtown's very fashionable again, but for a long time it wasn't. And I think there was like a generation of people here in the city who kind of just thought, there's nothing going on downtown. It's a scummy place to go. You only go there to go to court. There's nothing there.
That's true.
Which was true at the time. There wasn't a lot of restaurants. There weren't all the art galleries and coffee bars. And so people didn't really pay any attention to the history. And now people are interested in the history because people are going downtown again.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times that history is overlooked. And at times, and other times, like it's just not well researched at all. And it's a little difficult. This is something I had a talk with a historian, Jeff Belanger. But even back then, the media still didn't get it right because everything was still so accelerated, and finding newspaper articles in regards to crimes and murders was very difficult to search for because you couldn't tell like what was real and what was on point.
Yeah, and often a lot of the time, just on a practical level, the newspapers wouldn't put an address or a location where something would happen. They would say, it was a hotel at 5th and Spring.
Yeah.
Which could be one of 2 hotels at least, for example. But then sometimes later in the 40s and 50s, when there was a huge interest in true crime and pulp fiction magazines and detective magazines, sometimes they would absolutely put the address and the room where something had happened. They would print suicide notes. They would show dead bodies in the street, stuff that we would never see today.
Yeah, journalistic.
Yeah,
ethics,
it was a heavily competitive newspaper market.
Yes.
And so, you've heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. That would be in, and they would do that because, it was yesterday's or tomorrow's, as we call it in England, fish and chip paper. Everyone forgot it by the next day. That I can't tell you how many stories I came across where, I've got a whole archive of stories that I could never really fully find, where you'd find something awful that happened and then the newspaper never mentioned it again.
Wow.
Never had any idea if it was solved, even sometimes what the cause of death was. But it had been in the paper that day. It got the sales. That's all they worried about. No one cares about the inquest that happens, 2 months later.
What do you think was the most deadliest decade in Los Angeles? Was it, in your opinion, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s?
God, that's a great question.
It really is, because there's several of them, in my opinion.
Right
in my
now,
opinion,
2023, it's been.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you look on the whole, I mean, from what I found, I think probably because of the things we've talked about, that you could get away with crime, and that the technology wasn't as, I guess the 20s, 30s, and 40s probably would be a time where so much happened. And it was documented, but it was never quote unquote solved. I think as you get further and further on, technology gets better, policing gets better, and you can't necessarily get away with crimes. You couldn't necessarily buy a gun, you couldn't buy poison anymore.
Right.
You couldn't. I mean, even drawing more recently, or a little more recently, you can't leave town. You can't go to another place without your details being there. You forget, like 100 years ago, you could go into a hotel. I mean, this is now a lifetime to an extent. You could go into a hotel, you would sign a visitor's book, you could write any name, you
Right.
could pay cash, you could stay in a room the whole time and leave, and no one would ever know you'd been there or who you were. Now, that's virtually impossible today. It's impossible for us to do anything without some electronic trace of our lives. But you go back to the 50s, 60s, even 70s, you could do that. And that, of course, leads to any sort of illicit dealings if you wish to do that.
That is so true. I mean, it was a bit of a lawless time in a way, and everything was so corrupted, especially like in the 30s and 40s. I'm watching Perry Mason right now on HBO, and I'm just like, oh my God, it was just, it was brutal back then. I mean, it was so lawless and so cutthroat and so violent.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine from what we know of Los Angeles now that, 140, 150 years ago, it was a backwater. It was not considered to be an important place at all. Even Los Angeles wasn't like a big place within California. There were other cities that were bigger than them and considered more important. And so, people acted accordingly, and it was policed and legislated accordingly. It's only when certain things came through, Gold Rush starting, and then the movies and shipping and various other things made this city the city it is, that now we think, oh, it has a huge police force and a huge population. But you've got a small population. You don't have many police there at all, if at all. It's like you go to other states, they have state troopers, which there are here, I think, California state, that look after things outside the cities because there's such a rural, spread out population.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What was one crime that you couldn't shake off of your head? Like you couldn't stop researching?
Well, you know what? That's a bit. I'm going to do a bit of a cheat because there's one that I ended up doing a book about, which but you did ask. So, but I would have said I would have.
We
actually
love a
said
shameless
that.
plug.
We do.
It's a shameless plug, but I would have done it anyway, even if the book hadn't come out. It was a crime I found in the second book that had happened at a hotel. It was formerly a hotel at Hollywood and Vine. Very fancy hotel back in the day. You can't really see it now because it's got two very tall buildings next to it, and you can barely see the sign on the top because there's a big billboard in front of it. It was a very big hotel back in the day, and it went in my guide, or I researched it because it had a little cafe underneath so you could go. My guides were always like, it has to be somewhere you can go, not just look outside from the outside.
Right.
And I looked up the hotel and I looked it up back in the day, and I came across that there'd been it's a bit of a spoiler, but there had been a crime, a criminal act, a violent event at this hotel. And I just read the story and I put it in the book, and I just thought, I wonder what happened to all the people involved. What was the outcome of that? Because they're like 1,000-page chapters in the Gourmet Ghosts book. And I couldn't quite shake it. And in the end, I just started doing what we all do all the time. I started looking stuff up on Google to see. I thought there must have been a book. I thought I'll get the book, and that will satisfy my curiosity. And there wasn't a book. And I didn't find many newspaper reports either. And I thought, wait a minute, this has a lot of factors in it that seem very newspaper worthy. There's murder and there's suicide and money and sex. There was an interracial relationship, which in the 50s was very scandalous. I was like, how is there no book about this? And then I started to find it had been in some pulp fiction magazines, and it had been in some other places. And that just led me off on the book that I put out last year. That was really just initially my curiosity of what happened in this story. And then it led into like 5 years of finding family members, getting the FBI files and the police files, trying to find unpublished material and photographs, and really just trying to find the whole story and giving the family members and hopefully people who read it an idea of what actually happened the night of the murder that I had found.
And what is the name of the book that has this very much unsolved or, spectacular crime?
Yeah, it's called The Alaskan Blonde, and it has a subtitle, Sex, Secrets, and the Hollywood Story That Shocked America. And it has the Alaska and Hollywood elements because the murder took place in Alaska, in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is the second smallest city, or second biggest, I should say. It's a small place, and this was in the 1950s. So it's a very small city, and it was a very rich, successful businessman who was murdered in his bedroom, in his bed while he was asleep.
Wow.
His wife was beaten up. She's the Alaskan Blonde of the book. So his wife was beaten up. That was his fifth wife. And she said that two men had broken into the apartment, shot her husband and beaten her up and taken jewelry and money. But then the police got a tip that she'd been having an affair, and the investigation changed. But the investigation wasn't a particularly good investigation, and the case never came to trial. It was never officially solved. And the second half of the story all takes place in Hollywood, because Diane Wells, who is the Alaskan Blonde, the wife, she comes down to Hollywood and lives here for about 4 months before the trial. So that's the big Hollywood collection. And it was so weird because, like I say, it was the Hollywood Plaza Hotel. She's buried at Hollywood Forever, which I didn't know, which is like a little walk from my house. You know, all of these things there was this weird connection, and that was how it made me, write a book about it.
Wow.
That's what's so interesting and so amazing about the city, is that it's connections in every sense of the word. Like, you'll learn one story and then find out, oh, well, this person used to live down the street from my old apartment or my old job. And
Truly.
and this woman who was a part of this case is, buried right around the corner from you. It's like, kind of like you were meant to be there and meant to tell the story in a way.
There were definitely a few moments like that were freaky, but Los Angeles is very much a city of people coming from somewhere else.
Yes.
So many people come here from somewhere else. And it makes sense that there would, you search for a connection in a way when you move here. You try and find people that or stories that or people that you feel comfortable with, and nearly always they're from somewhere else.
Yeah,
they're nearly always from somewhere else. They're not. You don't often meet people who are born and raised in Los Angeles.
No, very rare. And a lot of people's misconception of people who originally are from Los Angeles is completely asinine. They think like, oh, they're the uppity ones that live up of Hollywood and Vine. No.
They think they're they have to be the children of actors or something. They have to be very closely related to the industry, because why would you be there? That's what people think. But of course, as we've said, California or Los Angeles is huge.
Right.
Yes.
There's lots and lots of millions and millions of people here who have nothing to do with the entertainment industry, pretty much. It's just where they were born or where they moved to, and they've had a completely normal life like everyone else. But as you said, Bryce, we only get a certain view of what Los Angeles looks like, and it's pretty slim. And it's also the one that the city likes to have. It is a view it's like, because it's very glamorous and it's very sexy, and it makes a lot of money, and it's an around the world, because what else they're going to do? They're big industries here. It's a massive port. That isn't something that's very sexy. Shipping
no, it's
goods.
True.
I don't know.
Particularly sexy. Well,
this city does have a way of seducing you. I mean, that's why people have a hard time wanting to leave in a way, and others are like, no, we're just picking up and going.
Yeah.
But speaking of connections, we do have one location that we're very connected to, and we are really, I hate to say this, but fans of the Bartlett.
I know, it's so bad.
And that's everywhere as well.
They're
everywhere.
It's
everywhere.
Yeah.
We're connected to Starbucks.
Oh, you meant the Bartlett Hotel. Yes, my bad.
That one. But I think there is a Starbucks like literally around the corner.
Thank God.
There is a Starbucks around the corner from everywhere.
Yeah. Truly.
Yeah.
So yes, the Bartlett Hotel, and this is a hotel that you actually bring up in your book, Gourmet Ghosts 2. It is hard to find people who have researched this hotel. You are probably, I want to say off the count of the fingers on my hand, I mean, it's probably you and two other people who have actually written about it, but you've really taken a deeper dive into the Bartlett Hotel.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's from, because I coming from England originally, I like to walk around. So, people don't really walk anywhere here. So, of course, downtown, I walk around all the time. And, when I was researching the book, anywhere that was a hotel, anywhere that had a bar attached, or anywhere that once had a bar attached, I would look it up, regardless of what I knew about it. But the Bartlett Hotel was one of the most interesting, because it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest. There's several that claim it, but it was at the end of the 19th century. That was when it was first built in, and it still has some little, stained glass and some insignia and stuff from the day when it was built, when it was called the Van Nuys Hotel.
Yep.
you know, before it was the Barclay. And so I looked it up, and there was quite apart from the fact that several people have died in the elevator shaft there, which was one of my one of the things that people seem to love is elevator shaft stories. There was a hideous double murder. A guy who killed one of his victims was here that I found. And again, as you say, Tammy, I looked it up, and there was a bit about this guy and some pictures, but not a lot. But then you read about what he did, and you think, how is that not a bigger story?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how is that not a bigger story at the time? But again, it was the 40s. You know, this wasn't the only thing that was happening. And this guy, you know, he confessed to it straight away. Killed 2 women in like 36 hours, confessed to it straight away. One of them he killed in the Barclay Hotel, but he was called like a sort of a Ripper killer, like a Jack the Ripper.
He was the LA slasher. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he really cut them up and decapitated them. And there are some pictures which I did find of them, and they're really not pleasant pictures.
No, you never want to Google that.
Yeah. I mean, he said he was like a, no, you don't want to Google that.
No,
but,
don't ever.
He said he was like I am a sexual, no. And, you know, he said, you know, I'm a sexual deviant. You know, I can't control myself. I went insane. I had to do it. And this is at the Barclay Hotel. I mean, that's the thing, as you say, sometimes you don't find a lot of research because I'm sure at the time, you know, the owners of the hotels are like, you know, could we possibly try and keep the coverage down a little? You know, if that's possible. And plus, you know, but at that time in the 40s and 50s, newspapers love that stuff. You know, they love putting that stuff in. So yeah, the Barclay Hotel's a good one. It's a good little undiscovered gem, I think, in terms of history-wise.
Exactly. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, this place, I mean, the Cecil Hotel can even hold a candle to this place. Like, it's just so deep in history, and the many deaths that have occurred here, and a near death that, you know, that almost happened during the construction of this hotel is just pretty amazing. Yeah, and what's really interesting about that place is like, it's like a triangle. It's like a Bermuda Triangle there. You have the Barclay, the Alexandria, and I believe it's either the Biltmore or the Cecil that's around there, but it's like this little trifecta of just haunted hotels in downtown.
There are a couple of triangles, you're right. And it's all in a pretty small area. It's all in a pretty small area as well. I mean, you know, as you say, people talk about the Cecil all the time, and I don't know how famous it would have been if Elisa Lam hadn't died in their water tank on the roof, because that really brought it back into public consciousness to an extent. But, you know, the Barclay Hotel had 2 serial killers there. They had the guy who, depending on what you call serial, if you call it, I know it's supposed to be 4, but the guy we were talking about, Otto Wilson, he killed 2 in a day. He was a lunatic. He was, you know, he was a serial killer. And then there was another guy who there's almost nothing about, which astounded me.
I think it was the Grim Sleeper.
No, well, I was talking actually about Vaughan Greenwood.
Oh, yes.
Skid Row slasher.
The Skid Row slasher.
Yeah,
yes.
He killed like 12 people.
Yes.
In a really short period. And one of them was at the Barclay, but he left like 3 of the bodies outside the Central Library. I mean, he killed a lot of people, and there was almost nothing about him whatsoever. And that was a connection to the Barclay Hotel. And that interests me more than the Cecil Hotel, which now is just, you know, it's the watchword for like a haunted or a scary hotel to go. And again, the Cecil Hotel in the day, beautiful hotel. It was one of the top hotels in downtown, really expensive, really well done. But it just, like a lot of them, went slowly downhill over the year. You had the Depression, and then it just went slowly downhill. And now that's the big one, is the Cecil. But, you know, it's almost become so big, it's like, I want to talk about something else.
Yes. I'm like, there's other hotels, guys. And they're like, well, the Cecil. And I love it when people say, well, it's the most haunted hotel. I'm like, well, name 3 ghosts that haunt it. And they're like,
no, that's right.
Well, I think it's I'm like, no. I want to know what is a full body apparition. And no one has given me this answer. It's all been like, well, I felt this negative energy, and I felt something overpowering me. Yeah. But I feel like that could also be fear itself in a way. Anxiety.
That's absolutely right. Totally. In terms of like the Cecil has had a lot of bad stuff happen there for sure. Way more suicides than anywhere else. And as a vibe, absolutely. I could see that people would have a horrendous vibe. I never found any ghost stories.
About
the place.
Thank you.
Never found the place. Now, not and of course you could make some up, and of course you could link it to stuff that's happened. But now that kind of stuff is out there. A lot of the stories are out there. But I never found, and I was researching this, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. There was nothing like that. There were no ghost stories then. But the Biltmore, yes, ghost stories. I talked to people in the Biltmore who told me about ghost stories in the Biltmore. For example,
yeah.
The same for the Roosevelt in Hollywood. I talked to people who told me stories, and I believed them. That is one of the things you do as a journalist. You don't talk to people when you're interviewing them. You try not to lead them into a story. You try and get them to just tell a story about anything without going, so what was the ghost like that you saw?
Yes, tell me about the ghost.
You
What
can't
were they
say
wearing?
that because it's not fair, because then they feel they have to tell you a ghost story. So you would ask them about the hotel, and then usually they would talk about their experience, and it's always the little details that mean it probably is something that, at least as far as they're concerned, really happened to them.
Yeah.
The little details that they tell you where you're like, okay, I really believe you were there and you really experienced that.
Yeah.
Rather than just somebody saying, well, it was this big guy, it was like 6 foot high and it came towards me and it floated towards me. And I was like, okay, well, which part of the building were you in? What time of day was it? And then sometimes they don't have all of that because it's just more of a story than something they're recalling from their own memory.
Absolutely. Spoken like a true journalist.
Well, you have to do it, because I thought that was the thing about these guidebooks. I thought I want it to be a guidebook that I want to buy and read.
Yeah.
And I don't want to read it and go, well, why didn't you ask about that? That sounds like I made that up. That doesn't sound real to me. Or where's any evidence to back all this up? Because you can never prove a ghost exists or not anyway.
Well, and I think that's such an important delineation of the things that we can prove versus the things that people believed happen. And in a way, that is also a kind of truth. It might not be scientifically true, but that's still a story that holds weight, as opposed to just reciting your PowerPoint facts about we've all, I get it. We've all seen American Horror Story. That's great. I love Ryan Murphy as much as the next person, but that's not the same as even if I don't, I'm not here to pass judgment on whether people are telling the truth or not. But ultimately, if they believe that it's happened, then that is their truth. And then that's a story that you can actually tell. It's such an important distinction, especially in this field.
Yeah. And especially, and plus, you could have the best evidence in the world and people are still not going to believe it.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's what I always say. You can have all the evidence, but no proof.
It wouldn't matter.
Yes.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter. You could have the best ghost picture, the best UFO picture, the best Bigfoot picture. You could have, a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. There would still be people who go, no, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost, Nessie is real.
Yeah.
Right?
You know what? It's a really interesting subject, and I've got time for the fact that it's possible. Whether it's an enormous dinosaur-like beast, who knows? It could be some other kind of aquatic creature for sure. But the thing is, I don't know if I want it to be solved. That's the thing. What do we want to do?
Yeah.
We're going to catch it and then then it's dead, or put it in a zoo or an aquarium.
Right.
Great. That sounds great. How does that make it more interesting? How does that make it any better?
Yeah.
I'd rather think that there could be something that's out there. And you go back, Nessie goes back hundreds and hundreds of years of people talking about that. And it's like, well, I guess they could have all been mistaken. That's the thing. You get to a certain stage where you're like, it can't be that every single person was mistaken. Somebody must have. And as you said, sometimes you talk to people and they really believe they saw something. And they really believe that they had an experience. And you can't turn around and go, you know what? I just don't believe you. I don't believe you. Because you don't, because you do believe them. You're there in the moment. You're like, that sounds real to me. That sounds real to me. I mean, people always ask me, have I ever seen a ghost? And I'm like, who knows? Probably. But do I have a particular story to tell about? No, I haven't, because I'd be super cynical about it. I'd be super skeptical. But if I did see something, I know I'm going to have a camera, and I know it's going to have to last more than a while. And, otherwise no one's going to believe me, regardless of what I say.
Yeah.
True. 100%. That is so true. I mean, even when it happens to you, you don't have the camera on, which has happened to me so many times.
Always,
the camera is not on, or something happened to my audio and it just went kaput, which has happened before. In your opinion, James, what in your opinion, what is the most haunted hotel in Los Angeles?
Now, you see, that's a good question. I mean, the most haunted hotel.
But in your, from your research and your finds.
I think the Biltmore, I think it has to be somewhere that's old. That's the
Yeah.
thing. It has to be old because there's so many people who've been through and so many things have happened. I think the Roosevelt's up there, the Biltmore's up there. I mean, I heard some great stories, like a couple of really good stories. You know where the last bookstore is?
Yes.
That particular building.
Uh-huh.
I know it's not a hotel, but I had a couple of stories in there that people told me that I was like, wow, that sounds.
I've heard someone
Yeah.
on social media was like, I used to work in that bookstore, the one that Elisa Lam was last seen. And someone's like, yeah, that place is really haunted. Like people don't like to close by themselves in certain areas.
Yeah.
They don't like to be by themselves in certain areas of that bookstore because things have happened.
Yeah, there's a bank vault at the there's an elevator shaft, as I say, that goes all the way down to the bank, which is in the basement where the vault is. And there was a guy, this is the best story I always talk about, is that there was a guy, a night watchman in the late 20s or 30s, who fell down the elevator shaft and died on the ground in the basement. And all the people in the bank could hear this guy shouting for help, but they didn't know where he was because it was their service elevator at the back, and the service elevator is still there in the building. And a lot of the staff don't like to go in it. I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of it, it doesn't look like we think of as an elevator. I mean, it's like this old, rough, and there's no roof on it. They didn't have roofs in the game. It doesn't have like lots of buttons in it. It's a lever system, and nothing like this. There's none that pull across doors or anything. These weren't electrically timed, any of that. People used to fall down elevator shafts. And I'm not laughing because of that. I'm just saying people used to fall down elevator shafts.
Yeah, because they were, curiosity killed the cat. They were so curious with this, mechanism. Like, what is it?
It was extraordinary how many people would put, because it's, they're counterweights. It's only now that, the counterweights are at the side. Sometimes they would be in the middle, or sometimes they would be, and people would put their heads in and they would get crushed or they would be beheaded. I mean, people would be beheaded by and we forget, we take them for granted, but elevators back in the day, and they were a new innovation. People didn't know what they were. Trap. They didn't trust them. That's why they were operators, because people were really uncertain about the idea of going up inside an enclosed space in a building. That's why there were operators there to reassure people. Because you're like, we can go up and down, it's fine. Because people really didn't know, and that, again, the technology, people had no idea. But the same about elevators. People couldn't work out how to use elevators initially because it was this moving ground. It didn't make sense.
Exactly. Especially like the telephone. They're like, wait, I could call someone in a different
and that's the thing. Imagine saying to Alexander Graham Bell, in 140, 50 years' time, everyone will have a telephone in their pocket that can call anywhere in the world. And we can also see them when we call. They couldn't even conceive of that.
Right.
Yeah.
What is the biggest ghost story attached? I'm so curious to the last bookstore. Like, what has been the consistent one? It
was that one. Well, there's a couple of really good ones, but the one was the night watchman who fell down the elevator shaft. And that actually happened. So that did happen. There was also another guy who killed himself in one of the bathrooms downstairs. This is back in the day. But the ones I've heard several times from the staff, the security guys, there's two entrances to the last bookstore. There's like the main one, and then there's another one on Spring Street itself. There's like the back door that you go in, or you used to go in to sell your books, because it's near the buy counter. There's always security there, and then they have the big marble stairs that go upstairs towards the other places within the building. And I've talked to several of the security guards there, and they said all the time the one that they hear is the woman walking up and down in heels. On one of the floors. And I said, but it could be a woman walking up and down in heels. And he said, no. He said, what happens is every new person that moves in to, whether it's one of the apartments or one of the offices, always calls down to go, who is that walking up and down the hallway in their heels? Because everyone else in the building always knows there's no one there, but they hear a woman walking up and down in heels. And you know what that sound is. I mean, it's pretty a strong sound. The other
seriously.
The other one that they've told me is that the stairs, it happens in a lot of buildings. Often security people will put a mirror at the curve of the stairs so they can see who's coming down the stairs before they come down. The story I got told there a couple of times is that they see a little girl on the stairs in a dress, and they see her in the mirror, but she never comes down the stairs.
Oof.
Now, several people told me that in that building. And of course, I looked it up in the archives to see if a small child had ever died there. Now, I couldn't find that. It doesn't necessarily mean a child did die there.
No.
But I certainly found in the book that if someone did, it often matched the ghost story. And they're passed through, and it's called like telephone, where the story changes a bit over the years.
It waters down.
Yeah, but so many of them definitely you would find some in the archives and go, oh well, that must be what they're talking about then, because it's really similar. A guy got killed in the bar, and he still appears where he was shot dead.
Obvious, yeah.
And then it turns out that there really was a guy killed over a game of pool. And where's the pool table? In the corner. And that's where they see the people. I mean, it's a lot of places, I'm sure you found, they're so used to it that it doesn't usually frighten them anymore, because usually the experiences aren't insidious or a particularly evil feeling. It's usually just they'll notice something or see something. It's usually not a bad thing. But 90% of the time, it's people aren't frightened. People are usually just, what the hell was that? Rather than being frightened. It's only the small percentage of stories where people are like, I felt under threat. I felt like I had to leave.
Yeah. That is so, I mean, think about it too. A woman in heels nowadays, we're wearing, Nike Dunks and Air Jordans. I mean, come on.
Yeah, there's no walking around in heels and on a marble floor as well.
Is walking, is that Bryce?
Yeah.
I gotta get around.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure a lot of our listeners want to know, James, the Roosevelt. What is is it true that the ghost of Marilyn Monroe haunts the Roosevelt? And I was always taught to always go back to the source of the story. When did this story, what year did the story come out? And apparently the whole legend or the story of the Marilyn Monroe ghost and the mirror came out, I think it was in the early 90s, late 80s. And
yeah, I mean, you're right again, like we talked about. You have to remember this, it's a really good story to pass out around the world. Anything Marilyn Monroe-rated, it's really only Marilyn and Elvis that have made it through all those years that people still know who they are.
Yeah.
So many stars of the past have all disappeared and no one knows. But Marilyn and Elvis are the two that everyone recognizes. So any connection that any hotel, or especially hotel, can get to Marilyn is a thing. So you have to always bear that in mind. But she did one of her early photo shoots. I think it was an ad for, I'm probably wrong saying toothpaste, because why would she buy a swimming pool? But there was a photo of her on the swimming pool at the Roosevelt Hotel. And that was supposed to be an early photo shoot or a shoot of her, either for an advert or for pictures of her. So she definitely spent time there. She may well have stayed there. It's quite possible. Lots of people did back in the day. It was the same thing where actors and actresses would stay locally around where they were shooting if they weren't locally based, and the Roosevelt was really local. So she was there. There are pictures of her, and you're right about the mirror. It did emerge in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was in relation to a story that's pretty thin, but it said that there was a person who was cleaning one of the rooms where Marilyn had once stayed. Not that she'd recently stayed in, but one of the rooms that she had stayed in, and they looked up in the mirror itself, and they saw her reflection in the mirror. So the hotel took the mirror and put it downstairs towards the lobby, sort of off the lobby. And people would come and look at the mirror, and they would say, of course, that they too saw Marilyn's reflection in the mirror. But what happened was it did disappear for a long time, actually. Somewhat in between the writing of my two books, the mirror disappeared because people asked me about it and they said, where's it gone? And I heard all sorts of rumors. I heard that it had gone to Disneyland, like Disney had bought it for some reason, that it was in storage, that they were going to put it in another one of their hotels, that it was going to go to like a museum as like an artifact, like a ghost of Marilyn type thing. But apparently the mirror is back now in the Roosevelt. I saw something the other week online that apparently the mirror is back there. And there is a picture of her, sort of an etched glass thing next to the mirror. But that's the mirror story, is that she's supposed to have appeared in the mirror in the room that she stayed in, and they brought the mirror downstairs, and that was sort of that. But I've heard some other really good stories at the Roosevelt, that again, a kid, which was a really upsetting story. Some of them are upsetting, where a small child who appears near the fountain in the lobby, And
Yeah.
that, I was told that was a story that she had drowned at the hotel and she was still haunting the hotel. And there were a few others that, I mean, the famous one is Montgomery Clift.
Yes, and his trumpet.
Playing the bugle and practicing. And that's true. He did stay there and he did practice the trumpet, and he was working. That was absolutely true. And women, again, Montgomery Clift, no one knows who he is now, but at the time and for a long time, fans would come and stay or want to stay in the room or on the floor where he stayed. And some of them said, he appeared, he was there, he sat on my bed, or, I saw him above me, or, so that's a particular one. And again, people said that they had heard the sound of a bugle. Now, that's a pretty specific sound.
Yeah.
As a noise, so people like that. But people, as you know, people will go and stay in hotels and places where things have happened, hoping for the chance that something will happen to them. And, chances are if you paid good money to stay in a room where something happened, you really want something to happen and something's going to happen.
Yeah, that is so true. Have you stayed in any of these hotels, and have you had an unexplainable experience, whether you didn't see something, but you felt something?
I've stayed in quite a few of them, and you know what it is now. You always do the thing. You hear a noise at night. Usually, if I hear something more than 3 times, that's when I get up to have a look. Because you've always got to figure, like, it could be a towel falling down, it could be something in the bathroom, it could be one of those things. You can't always be like, a cat on a hot tin roof thinking, oh my God.
Yes, I've been around those people. I'm like, calm down.
You can't do that. But you hear it once or twice, or you hear it again, and you hear it again. Apart from thinking, is that someone breaking in, or is it somebody outside in the yard or whatever? It would have to be a couple of times before I go and have a look. But, again, these old buildings, these old hotels, a lot of the older hotels, they tell me that the elevators, they go up and down on their own and will stop at different floors and stay for too long. And that's a common one. They're old buildings. It's like you stay in an old house. They make noises at night. The weather can affect things, and the temperature, and, floorboards and stuff. So you have to, otherwise we'd just be terrified all the time. I don't want to be terrified all the time.
No, truly not.
I don't want to be terrified
Neither
all the time.
do I.
No.
That's what I get too. I get a lot of people that are like, well, that hotel, like, it's haunted. I'm like, well, what makes it haunted? They're like, it's the elevator. I'm like, well, please specify. And they're like, well, it goes up and down to different rooms. I'm like, that happens. It's an old elevator. This is an old building. Even the one at our old job, Bryce, would just act up too. It was the
worst. That one actually is haunted. I'm sorry.
Bad maintenance. It was haunted.
Just the devil itself.
Yeah. I mean, think of it this way. We've all got computers and we've all got phones. Right. How often do they crash and something happens to them? And they're supposed to be the most modern of technology. And you look at it and you're like, my screen's just frozen. I don't know why. I didn't do anything. So if that happens now, of course it happens on old things that are mechanical. But, seeing an elevator go up or come down and no one's called it and no buttons, that is freaky.
Yeah.
Because it's like it's done it on its own.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 100%. What are there any other projects that you're embarking on right now in terms of, investigating other stories, other places in Los Angeles?
Well, I do. I did mean to. I am starting a sort of a thing called. First one's going to come out soon. Just like pocket guides, going on from the guide thing. Just little things that will fit in it, like really fit in a pocket. Not like a book size. So they're like the size of a small diary, something like that. So they're like 50 pages long, and they have like the best pit stories. So I'm going to do one for downtown and one for Hollywood.
Oh, nice.
Oh, I want all of them.
So it's going to be, there'll be some stuff that's from before, some new stuff, some updated stuff. And the first one I'm doing is like a sort of a madness and mayhem and strange stories one.
Nice.
So that's all new stuff, which it doesn't fit into like the guide thing. So it's like, there's like the Mad Pirate of Catalina. Ever heard of him?
Sure.
No, neither. Oh, you have? Oh, excellent.
I think, Tammy, we talked about it with, I'm going to have to look back through our episode. We talked about it with someone, and I did not know about it.
No, me neither. I only found about it.
Yeah.
It was like
someone mentioned it, and I remember like
I've heard like
Catalina
like, here and there. Yeah, I was like Catalina wine mixer ghost. What? No, it's
yeah. It was a guy. It was a guy, and it was a real guy who was a pirate. That's what he was charged with. I mean, he chartered a yacht, and a load of people went out on the yacht, and he killed the captain and took everyone hostage and said, "Right, we're going to Mexico." And then two of the guys who were the crew overpowered him and beat him up and threw him overboard. And then they had to be found by the Coast Guard. Wow. So that actually happened. So he was a real pirate. And that was a sensation. And then there was like LA's Bonnie and Clyde. That's a story that I found that was kind of mentioned in one of my books, but I just looked into it a lot more. So that was a young couple, a young blonde girl. She was like 21 and her boyfriend, and they did a load of robberies together.
Wow.
And they were like a sensation at the time. And he ended up, it timed well because of like the Queen dying and there being a new king. But he actually ended up writing to the king, which was George V at the time, saying, I've been arrested for this crime. I'm an English citizen. Can you get a pardon? Because he was going to hang for it. Like he wanted to be, to get his sentence commuted because he was an English citizen. But I'm not going to tell you if it worked. And then some Halloween murders. I found like 3 or 4 murders that actually happened on Halloween where people used masks. Like trick or treat.
No.
Yeah, which is pretty
What
brutal.
decades did these occur?
I mean, you think about it, it is the best. 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s. Yeah, I mean, and it's the best time. Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's the best time to kill someone is when everyone can dress up in a costume.
Oh dear!
But it did actually happen. And then there's a really interesting suicide at Hollywood Forever that I found out about. And the stuff that I did, a massive research thing I did about Jack the Ripper, the article is about Jack the Ripper being in LA before he went to London and committed all the murders.
Knew it. I knew it. It was a rumor. I mean, I think Jack the Ripper was here in LA. I was like, I could see that. Yeah, it's all about connections. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
Sitting, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. We forget in those days. Everybody, you didn't fly anywhere in those days. Everyone came by boat.
I know.
So everyone traveled all the time. There was no Ubers, no planes, and this guy there was a big flap in the late 1880s, early 1890s about this guy who was arrested in LA, who was wanted in LA, that people thought was Jack the Ripper.
Oh my gosh.
Which was great. I mean, I did a lot of research on that, and it was quite a sensation for about 2 weeks here because, again, the newspapers thought Jack the Ripper was here. We've got a Jack the Ripper story. He was actually here. Now, I'm not going to tell you if it was him. No one knows who it was. Right. No one knows who Jack the Ripper was.
That is another unsolved mystery. Yeah,
another unsolved mystery.
Theories about it, but
a lot of theories. But it had a connection to one of the very hot suspects at one time, and I was like, oh my god, that happened here in LA. Now, how would you ever find that? You have to go in the archives. Anyone who's listening, if you're ever interested in this kind of thing, like just go into the archives. You can access it through the public library.
That is so true. That's what people always ask me. They're like, well, how can I research and look into these things? I'm like, so easy. We have archives. The public library, LA Times, newspapers.com is a really good source.
Newspapers.com, yes, totally use that. And I always start with what I say to people is put your home address in. Yeah. Look up your home address.
Wow.
And see if anything ever happened there, because especially if it's an older building, you never know who might have lived there for a start. It could have been someone notable back in the day, especially you can put your cross street, you can put your cross street a visit or put, if you live at 420, put 418 and 422 because, buildings get knocked in and changed around, and that could be your building. I found people who had like a marijuana thing growing in their backyard this is way back in the day. I was like, that's cooler than a murder. There was somebody growing pot in their backyard. I said, that was back in the 40s they were doing that.
Wow.
And they got discovered and they were arrested, because it was illegal then. But that was at someone's house. They'd moved in, and I do that usually when people move house. I'll say, give me your address. I'll look it up.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's so true.
That's where I would say to start. Is go look up your own address or your friend's address or a family address. And then if you want to look even more, like look up your favorite bar. That's what I always do, or your favorite restaurant or the place you go a lot, because it doesn't always necessarily mean it's always been that place.
Well, we just came out of an era, like in the post-COVID LA, there's so many businesses that did not survive, unfortunately,
right,
that are being replaced or altered or changing ownership or knocked down entirely. Like we're witnessing in real time as our city goes through quite an upheaval, and this is not the only time that has happened. In this city,
it is a pity, like you say, that so many of the older buildings get knocked down. You know,
that is true.
It's really difficult to not have a building that's 100 years old that doesn't have any history, that's probably never been in the newspapers for anything, even if it's just like a car accident was outside. But sometimes it will be, you know, that one of the past owners, you know, died a natural death in the house.
That is
sometimes that happens, you know, and if it's a multi-apartment building, there's even more chance of it.
Especially the land. During the pandemic, I did an episode about this in Chasing Ghosts. During the pandemic, we had students from our old job at this acting school that were living off of Hollywood near Vine in Highland. And they lived in it's like a new building. And they were experiencing these weird activities inside their apartment. And they're all actors. Just like you said, I inputted the address into the computer and I get the Earl Gates and Crane funeral home that once stood in this place, exactly the same place of that apartment building. And they cater to the funerals of the early silent film stars. And I'm like, of course, they're like little conduits. Like we mentioned in our haunted theater episode, like actors are conduits and they are definitely stirring something up there with that energy. That energy is attracted to them. Whatever was there, it's just consistent and is a rotation. It's so interesting. But everywhere, and like you said, Bryce, like it's just layers and layers of history.
Really,
you know.
Sometimes it's not always just what you think it is. Like in the last 20 years, you know, like one of the best things I found in the Alaskan Blonde, one of the weirdest things, the connection things. When there was a mortuary that was involved. I'm not going to say how, but in Hollywood. So I looked up where this mortuary was because it doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, where is that mortuary now? I wonder where it is. It's where Book Soup is. Do you know that bookstore in West Hollywood?
Oh my God. Yes, that was 10 minutes away from my old apartment. I used to venture there a lot. Oh my God.
So that used to be a mortuary. It's a really cool building. Like really, it was beautiful. It's all white on the outside. So that used to be a mortuary I know.
You're not going to believe this, James. Like, okay. So in Tammy's earlier years, like living in WeHo, I would go there and read like the magazines and the new books and go to the signings and everything. And I just like chuckled one day with the sales girl and I was like, is this place haunted? And she's like, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Just like dead face, like, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's just like, weird things happen here when I close. I don't like to be here by myself. And now you just like validated it.
I'll send you the picture of the mortuary.
I want to see it because now that I remember, you said Book Soup, and I haven't thought about. I don't even know if it's there still.
It's still there. It's still there. And that was the weird thing about pre-pandemic. They did a thing a few years ago where they said, local authors, you can come and sit in the window and be living art. You can write your latest book and sit in the window and people can look at what a writer looks like, right? Like a zoo.
That's the most LA.
So LA.
Very, very LA.
So
I volunteered to do it and I went in and I was writing the Alaskan Blonde. And of course, that has a direct connection that I had no idea about. That years ago, I was like, oh my God. It has a direct connection to the book that I was writing. Isn't that weird? That was weird.
So cool. But you know what, James? Like
synchronicity.
Say like in another 50 years or 20 years, like this book, like really like 100, like just explodes everywhere. And people are like, this is the place where James Bartlett wrote the book.
Yeah.
Who is that old guy in the window? Yeah. I mean, that was a really weird thing that happened. But as I'm sure you found so often, you only dig a little bit into any family or any history, there's always weird things that happen. There's nothing weirder than what real people do.
Truly.
There's so much stuff you can't make up. That fiction, you can make anything up, but people will go, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
But when it's non-fiction or when it's stuff that really happened, you can't say, I don't believe that. You're like, really? Here are all the newspaper articles about it. Yeah. This really happened. There's nothing, nothing weirder than what happened to what people will do.
Really.
So true. And people always come back with, well, that's the media. It's the media. We don't even know if it's true, which is fair. But I mean,
not necessarily 50. And crime reporting has a lot of strict regulation on it as well. You have to, you have to get names right. right, you have to get locations and addresses right. Because if you put
Yes.
down, it's why a lot of famous killers that we know always have 3 names,
Mhm.
because the newspaper articles will put their full name, first, middle, and last, because someone else who has that name, if my name was James Bartlett, right? And then there was a
Right.
serial killer who was James Bartlett as well.
Mhm.
If someone didn't put in the newspaper, I could sue that newspaper and say, I'm suing you because you've said it's me.
Yeah.
I am James Bartlett. And then no, it's James John Bartlett. I'm like, you didn't put that.
Right.
You put
Yes.
James Bartlett. People think I'm a killer now. I mean, obviously that doesn't happen, but it could happen. So that they're very specific about crime report.
Wow.
See, guys, we did something. We use our middle names.
That's right.
That's right.
So that people know that we are the killers. Thank you.
Yes. Well, now you'll never be able to get away with anything because they have your full name now. But that is yeah. You know, it's Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
You know, no one called him Lee Harvey.
No.
You know, James Earl Ray. No one called him James Earl.
Right.
But they had to get the right name in the paper because it was really important. They didn't want anyone coming up for the simple reason that someone might go around and go, oh, you're James Earl, aren't you? You just killed Martin Luther King. I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
And of course, and that has happened. It's happened, as we've read before, where people's names have gone in and people have gone around, not lynch mobs per se, but people have gone around houses and said, you're that guy who's accused of kidnapping that girl.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that on TikTok, the stupid web sleuths.
Yeah, and it's happened.
Yeah, the Karen, on this video is like, Sarah Smith, and then there's like 50 of them, and all 50 get like hounded, and they're like making a video on TikTok again. I'm not that Sarah Smith. I don't. It's
and the
ridiculous.
thing is, they won't believe them by that stage. They said, "Well, of course you'll say it's not you. Of course you'll say you're not them because you don't want us to come round because we found you." And it's like, no, I really am that. But that's the problem with social media is it can be so instant.
Yeah,
but newspaper
it's too instant.
Yeah, that is a problem with it. But back in the day, newspapers, that's where people got their information. Newspapers and radio, and then later television. But people really we don't think about it now, but people really, really trusted newspapers back in the day, and radio, really trusted it, and that was where they got their information.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody tuned into radio like they do with podcasts.
It's interesting how it's come around again. Everything's cyclical.
Yes.
Everyone likes to listen to information, and for some reason, I think in this case, for example, because we're really saying it and we're real people.
Yeah.
It's the same with when you interview people. When you interview a person, you actually speak to them. It's different than just reading it. When you actually see them, when you actually hear them, you can hear their voice and you hear their nuances and you hear what they say, or you even see some of it and you think, right, that person seems believable to me, or that person doesn't seem believable. But when you just read it, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know any of the context to it.
Wow, James, we're going to have you back on our podcast.
Oh dear. I've talked way too much.
We have other events in the horizon too. Yes. We would love for you to be our special guest.
I'm happy to do it. It's been always fun.
Yes, because I follow you on social media, and I'm so glad you reached out. And I'm unhappy with our spam.
Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. I mean, like I said, when it's something, I don't do a lot of these because a lot of them aren't that interesting or aren't that fun to an extent. But the ones that seem to be interested in and have a genuine interest, I love doing them. Yeah. Because I like talking about history. And, it's something people are really, really interested in this. And it's all about getting people to read and getting people learn and getting a bit about history and trying to express how they feel and their interest, because it wasn't long ago that being interested in this kind of stuff made you a weirdo. Yeah. And it wasn't so socially acceptable, to kind of, it's like you're just weird because you're interested in that. And it's like, well, it doesn't have to be, there is an actual history and an archive and, real things that happened. But now it's the most socially acceptable thing in the world.
Oh, yeah.
100%. And that's why we're Hollyweird. I know it sounds a little corny. People are like, oh, it's so weird when you call it Hollyweird. And I'm like, it's weird. It is weird.
It is. Yeah. Nothing weirder than people, honestly. You're absolutely right. It's nothing weirder than people. Definitely. I mean, even when they're not killing people or doing anything, people are still weird.
Yeah.
Absolutely. James is like the missing link of our Hollyweird paranormal.
Yes.
Missing link right here. Trifecta is a circle.
That's that magic triangle.
James, where can people stalk you, find your books? I know you do lectures. When is the next one? Please go ahead and drop all your socials and your, upcoming events.
Okay. So I'm there's gourmetghosts.com for the Gourmet Ghost stuff. thealaskanblonde.com for the Alaskan Blonde stuff. The same pretty much for all the other social media things. I did just do a talk at the Central Library downtown when it pissed with rain, which wasn't the best day to do it, but that went pretty well. That was about the Alaskan Blonde. As anything I've got coming up, I can't even think of anything, but I do occasional stuff. Sometimes I'm trying to get some walking tours going.
I was going to say, you should do one.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you should do like all of them.
Yeah, there is a company that wants to do one downtown. So obviously it's going to have to be slightly better weather than this, but that will be starting as a monthly thing.
Let us know when, so we can help you promote it, because and so we can attend it as well.
Yeah, I mean that would.
Please don't sign me up for walking, Tammy. Thank you. I don't want to be walking.
Oh, it's a little. It's not too heavy a walk. It's only it's all just the areas we talked about.
Just in a moosh walk, Bryce.
Yeah. Yes.
Put your heels in your bag. Bring your trunkless. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be perfect.
Yeah. See, even James knows.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, James, for being a part of this podcast. I mean, like all the elements: true crime, haunts, food, and history. I mean, it's just the perfect concoction for gourmet ghosts, of course. And in a sense, like, it's not just ghosts in the spiritual sense, but ghosts of the past that you are retelling their tales once more, because someone has to tell their story one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. And we hope that we get to see you talk soon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other upcoming events that you may have, or?
Can't think of any. I mean, usually they're on the social if I do something. When I haven't got a lot coming up, I'm traveling a fair bit at the moment doing other stuff. But I'm going to like a mystery conference in August. Nice. But that's more for mystery books and true crime books.
Why am I not surprised?
I mean,
I'm going to a mystery conference.
Yeah. People love a good mystery, but they also like it when it's solved. I found as well. They like a mystery, but they like it to be solved.
Yes.
That's a very modern thing. People live in an age where we don't expect anything to ever be unsolved. Yeah, people want a solution. They think we've got the technology, we should always be set, but life isn't as easy as that.
Truly.
100%. Well, once more, thank you so much, James, for being a part of this podcast, for being our special guest. And we will definitely be in touch very soon for another. I know I could also read the emails right now, like, bring him back. Ask him this, please.
Yes.
Has he seen the Marilyn Monroe ghost? Yeah. Maybe.
Here she is now.
Here she is. There we go. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, James. And we'll definitely be in touch very soon. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. And always remember to stay Hollyweird.